Hello, everyone. Welcome to the March Kubernetes community meeting. Thank you all for joining or for watching, if you're watching this on the recording, which hopefully more of you are. I'm Josh Burkus. I am hosting today's meeting. And Allison is our note taker, and Laura is our usher here. You too can be a volunteer for the glamorous community meeting that we have every month. It's actually kind of fun. Plus, you get to know a lot of people in the community who you maybe didn't know before. If you are interested in this, please contact us in SIG Contributor Experience, either through the mailing list or through the Slack, and we will be happy to set you up helping out with one of the future community meetings. The usual housekeeping. First of all, this is an official meeting of the Kubernetes project. As such, we are subject to the Kubernetes Code of Conduct. So please be respectful towards each other. Let's see, what else do I need for housekeeping?
Do you want to tell them about the read-only version?
Oh, right. Yes. We posted a link there in the chat for a read-only version of the notes. If you are not taking notes or adding things to one of the agenda items, please close your tab of the editable version and open your tab of the read-only version, simply because Google Docs tends to slow down when too many people have a document open. And Allison needs to be able to take notes. So that's there. We have a number of topics for this meeting. All those topics were gathered from the community over the last several weeks as things that we felt were of general community interest. However, for any and all of you as contributors to Kubernetes, you are entitled and in fact encouraged to put things on the agenda for the community meeting when they are things that the community should broadly pay attention to. And again, please either just drop something on the agenda document, which is open year round, or contact SIG Contributor Experience, or use our form. Laura, if you could drop a link to that form in there, to say that you have an item and give us information about what it is. Because that's what this meeting is for. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get started with the meeting. We've got some announcements. One of them I'm going to be real quick on. So the release Cadence survey is open. That link is in that link. Oh, that is not the right link. That link is in the notes and will soon be posted to chat. And we will be talking more about that later in this meeting. There is, by the way, a second survey. This is not a Kubernetes community survey. This is a survey being done by a student at Florida University. Spurthy, if you want to turn your camera on and wave at everybody. Hey there. So Spurthy, who's a student at Florida University doing her graduate study in CS, wants to find out how we interact with bots such as the Prowbot, and has put together a survey with the help of some of the people in the community. So take a look at that link in the notes and fill it out if you have time. Thank you. And then finally, we are planning to have a contributor summit at KubeCon Europe. Puya, are you here? Yeah.
Yes, I am. Here, I'll make it short. There will be a KubeCon Contributor Summit in Europe, in Valencia. It's going to be on the Monday, the 16th. So pre the Colo events. We're currently aiming at kicking off the organization on Monday. There is roughly a plan to make it unconference style, single track plus whole track. And volunteers are still welcome. If you want to volunteer, just join the Orga meeting on Monday. The link is in the notes document that I'm going to post in the chat in a bit. And or just join the Summit staff channel, but only join the Summit staff channel if you want to volunteer. If you just want to join the Contributor Summit, there's also a Contributor Summit channel where we're going to post registration information and other kind of things.
Okay. Thank you. And with announcements, it's time to move into release updates. To give us release updates, we should have one of our release leads.
Yeah, Cici here.
Yep. Hey, Cici, go ahead.
Hi. Yeah. Hi, everyone. This is Cici from the release team leads. I'm going to be the release lead shadow for this cycle, and I'm going to give the updates for the release team. And currently, we are at week 10, and the release is currently still scheduled for 19th April, which is in week 15th. And I will just give some major milestones for everyone to be aware of. First, we are going to start to take exceptions starting March 21st, and we are going to have like one more burn down meeting added starting next week, also 21st of March. And we will have daily burn down meetings starting 28th of April, March. And also we will have our first release retrospective meeting scheduled also next week. And currently we have 16.6 enhancement tracked, and we are like roughly 2 weeks to code freeze, which is Wednesday, 30th of March. So for all the tracked enhancement, please be aware you have to get all the PR merged before the code freeze to be able to consider that as completed. And for all the enhancement which needs docs, please be aware you have to open the placeholder PRs before 31st of March. And the doc deadline for PR ready to review is 5th April. And our docs team will make sure that all the docs be merged 1 week before the mainly release. And we are starting to collect the major SIMS candidate. And if you have like any suggestions, please don't hesitate to reach out or for any potential release block context. And we are easy to be reached in the SIG release channel. So please reach out there if you have any question or concerns. For the CI signal update, we currently still have one failing test. We will be syncing with the CI signal guys to make sure it gets addressed before the release. And for the patch release, we're currently waiting for the Alpha 4 release card, and all the previous release card went smoothly. Yeah, that's basically the updates from us. Thank you.
Thank you. Lawrence, did you want any comments about the current state of CI Signal?
Yeah, hi everybody, CI Signal Shadow for this release here named Laura. Basically, exactly as Cici said, the important deadline is for the next release cut, which is next Tuesday. So we're keeping an eye on that. Both of these are a bit of a long-standing open failure and flakes. So they have a bit of a history too, but we'll be coming around and making sure that that's resolved before Tuesday. And yeah, that's it.
Okay, well, thank you. And I actually forgot to solicit anybody from the patch team, from release engineering. Do we have anybody online here? Okay. I won't say anything other than we should have gotten patch releases yesterday. And just look at the dev list for that. Okay. Well, thank you. And that said, let's go into our first KEP item here, which is the release cadence update. This is a KEP from a year ago, And we've kind of really reached the next stage in that. So Jeremy, if you would like to go ahead and take that away.
Sure. Nice to see everybody. I haven't been on a community meeting in a little bit, and it's fun to see all of the familiar faces. So for those that are not aware, in 2020 with the 1.19 release, we ended up, because of events unfolding in the world and just the general state of things, the schedule for the 1.19 release got pretty elongated. And the kind of takeaway or the fallout from that is that we ended up with only 3 releases for that year. And that kind of served as a talking point or a place to kick off discussion about what was the proper release cadence for Kubernetes. There's a lot of factors that go into determining what the optimal thing is. But if you take a look at the support windows and the number of releases that happen per year and how hard it is for some people to upgrade, we started the discussion about maybe we should move to a permanent 3 release cadence or try it for a while and see what it looks like. Sort of a natural experiment, as Jordan just said in chat. And as part of that, we created a KEP, and the KEP is linked here. You're welcome to go read it. But at a really high level, what the KEP proposed was fixing the number of releases per year to 3, and from that kind of backing into a loose framework for generating schedules. So on average, releases are 15 weeks. On average, there will be around 2 weeks between them to allow people to do some norming and forming for the next release teams, and then things that go into that. One of the things that we decided to do as part of the KEP was to send a survey after we had done this for a little while to collect feedback from folks. And today we're going to talk a little bit about some of that feedback. Thanks to Josh for taking some of the data that came out of the surveys and making some pretty graphs for us. But the survey is still open. And again, I think we linked it in the chat earlier, but it's also linked in this document in this section as well. If you have not filled it out yet, please do so. Your feedback is very, very valuable and will help us determine whether this is the pattern we continue or whether we need to make any further tweaks to the release cadence or the schedules themselves. I think a really interesting thing that came out of this was that the answers kind of break down in a pretty clear pattern. People strongly prefer the 3 release cadence so far. There's a smaller number of people that prefer but not strongly prefer the 3 release cadence, and then a smaller number that has no preference. The 4 release cadence preference seems to be pretty low amongst the respondents so far. So again, this is still in progress and we're still collecting results. Another interesting thing is that there are a ton of people that are still running very old versions of Kubernetes, whether that's through choice, they don't want to upgrade, or they just can't because of the difficulty that come with doing major upgrades like that. If you look at the data in the 3rd chart that's in the notes, we see a lot of people are running 121, but there's also a lot of people running 120, which is now in maintenance mode. And there's a surprising number that are still running 119, 118, or the bucket of 117 or older. So we didn't really go into any more granularity there. But that's a lot of folks that are running clusters that are no longer getting patches, no longer getting updates. And again, whether that's because it's difficult to kind of keep up with the upgrade cadence, we don't have the direct drill down here for that or not, but looking at the data, it's pretty clear so far that the 3 cadence release thing is working okay for folks. From the release team's perspective, we think it's been beneficial. Just the change in general has been beneficial. It's been a little bit easier to staff the release teams. We did have some difficulty coming into the 2021 year after, it's hard to really determine what the cause was, but we had some difficulty getting role leads for some of those teams. It's difficult to make that kind of time commitment. The predictability of it makes it a little easier to know, like, I'm going to be able to commit to this time because I know that it's going to be pretty much these dates. Inside the KEP, we have some high level guidance about what it's going to look like for the rest of 2022. Those dates are notional, so they may shift a little bit depending on things that happen, but you get a little bit better understanding of what things are going to look like. Obviously, the downside is that with fewer releases, the cadence or the velocity of getting new features out falls a little bit. So that's an area where we end up, needing to do some balancing between the needs of contributors and the needs of users. And with that, I'll open it for any questions. Again, I think the major takeaway here is if you have not done the survey, please do so. We would very much like to have the feedback. And it'll help us make decisions for the community going forward.
Yep. So if you have any comment on release cadence, go ahead and raise your hand.
There's a question in the chat that's not really related to this, but I'll answer it since we're here and we're kind of paused. Any idea when shadows will be hired for the upcoming releases? Because of the predictable schedule, generally what happens for every release is at the end of the cycle, we send out a survey, a Google form, basically to collect applicants. So that'll generally be in the last 2, 3, maybe 4 weeks of the release. And you can kind of back that up from the release date. So if you look at the release date for 1/23, as CC mentioned, or sorry, 1/24, as CC mentioned, that is supposed to be April 19th. So probably end of March, which is coming up. Beginning of April, you'll start to see some of the comms go out for that. So definitely stay tuned to Kubernetes Dev if you're not there already. Yeah, thanks Dim for dropping the link to the release timeline into the chat as well. I think Eddie also asked, with the change in the cadence, have we seen an uptick in cherry picks or backports? And I don't think we've seen like a major shift in that pattern. I think Adolfo is on as well. Do you have any other opinions there?
I mean, not much, to be honest. At least regarding the time spent with approving cherry picks and reviews, it's not much of an uptick.
Yeah, and the other thing, someone did a report on 1.23 for the number of exception requests, and it did not go up markedly with the change in release cadence.
It did not.
Yeah. Part of it was we were trying to decide, it was in a thread about deciding how long code freeze should be. Mm-hmm. One of the release team helpfully posted a bunch of stats for the last like 4 releases. And there just, I mean, there was a small increase, like as you'd expect with a slightly longer one, but there wasn't a doubling or anything like that, which would indicate a problem.
Yeah, I think on that kind of like that line of thinking, the number of enhancements that has landed in those releases has generally, I think with the smaller cadence, has been a little higher. Like this time around, we have 66 things that are being tracked, and that runs the gamut of brand new alpha things that are graduating to beta, things that are graduating to stable, things that are deprecating as well. And that number is higher than I think we saw in the times prior to, say, like 119, but it's been fairly consistent across those releases. Since 119 was a little different as well, because while it was elongated, we didn't keep the enhancements collection period open for longer. It was kind of coming off of the previous normal cycles from before, and we were wondering whether the 120 release coming right after that was going to be like a big bang thing where folks had a lot of queued up things that they wanted to ship, and whether that would be unusual. And it turns out it was bigger, but it didn't seem like out of line with the ones that came after 120.
Okay, Jordan wants to know whether we track backports per release branch over time. Does anybody know the answer to that?
I don't think we keep that as a running set of data, but I bet we could build that set of data if that's of interest to folks.
I think that would be interesting. I have a feeling that it's going up, but for reasons unrelated to the release cadence and for reasons having a lot to do with security holes.
Yeah,
So,
categorization could be interesting. That there are 2 tabs on that sheet I linked. One was things marked as regressions and one was just bug fixes, but security fixes is another interesting dimension.
okay. Any further comments about release cadence? No, we'll move on to the next item. Okay, so next item, this is David's. There's going to be a change in how we handle beta APIs in the future. Something that folks should know about. David?
Sure. So in 124, we being SIG Arch, decided that beta APIs should not be enabled by default. Our beta APIs are not considered stable, and so reliance on these APIs or enabling these APIs exposes clusters to bugs and unfinished work. So when you enable the beta APIs, you're guaranteeing that users who use them will eventually have to make a move either to a new beta version, or if the beta doesn't progress, then removing it entirely or moving to a stable version. And by enabling it by default, you're making it easier for dependencies to grow around unfinished APIs and unfinished API behavior. Turning them on by default makes it worse because they're available in nearly all the clusters. And if I were really going to sum it up, I would say that Kubernetes is at a point in its life cycle where having production clusters be our beta testers by default is no longer a reasonable choice for us. So in 124, we have started all new beta APIs in a disabled by default state. There are ways to turn them on, and those are documented, or their PRs to document them are open. So it is still possible to run them. They just won't be on in production clusters by default.
So I actually have one question about this, which is, after this, what is the technical difference between an alpha feature and a beta feature then?
Beta features themselves are still on by default. The APIs are not, right? So there's a distinction between a beta API that clients effectively code to and functionality that is on and off by default in a kube cluster using the existing data that is present.
Okay. What's the technical difference between alpha and beta APIs then?
I can answer that in a few ways.
That'd be great.
Alpha APIs have no forward compatibility guarantees, so they can be dropped in a single release. They can have incompatible changes made to them in a single release. There's no guarantee that you'll be able to update a cluster that you've created alpha API objects on. Beta APIs have forward compatibility guarantees. We say, if we progress this, we will do it in a way that converts and round trips, and you can upgrade non-disruptively. That's the most significant difference. There are a few other ones, like the amount of time we will give you between deprecation and removal for a beta, but the fact that you can upgrade a cluster that you created beta things in is the biggest difference by far.
Okay. Do we have other discussion about beta APIs disabled by default?
There's the discussion in the KEP. There was the discussion at the SIG meeting. If you go back and see if there was even more discussion on an email thread or on the message thread beyond the here's the KEP.
Yeah, and for people who are watching this in the recording, that is the place to add your comments and suggestions, offers to help, if any. Is that? I was just wondering if there was any discussion here in the meeting how the change will affect folks.
There's a
There's a
question in the chat.
Oh.
Yeah, so APIs that are already on by default will remain on by default, and turning them off by default would break people. So this is just about new APIs. It's even slightly narrower than that. If there's a new version of a beta API that was enabled by default, we will keep that on by default. But net new beta APIs will be disabled by default.
Okay, so no other hands up. I will say in a follow-up is this sounds like good material for a Kubernetes blog post as well. Puerco, are you able to enable your mic and give us an update on patch releases?
Yeah, just a quick one. So yesterday patches were cut for versions 1.21, 22, and 23. Release hit a small hiccup because we are slowly rolling in some of the changes we are implementing to sign the Kubernetes images and artifacts, but the release managers team was able to fix them and recover the releases, so they should be working as expected right now.
Great, thank you. Okay, so and now we have our third topic, which is actually kind of a continuation from what was a fairly lively discussion last month, which is WG Reliability has come forward with a suggestion around improving reliability in Kubernetes, since reliability, like security, is everybody's job. Improving reliability in Kubernetes needs to pretty much involve everybody in the project. And as such, we're trying to provide multiple opportunities for contributors across the project to offer suggestions and ideas and thoughts on ways that we could make improving reliability a continuous process. I will say for my part, I'm not sure that reliability is necessarily decreasing, but it certainly is not continuously improving in any measurable way. Even if you're only looking at test flakiness, test flakiness is not better now than it was the last time I was on the release team 2 years ago. And of course, there are potentially lots of, and hopefully are lots of other measures of reliability. So I wanted to continue the discussion here in the community meeting, as well as on the linked CAP, and I'll actually link the CAP from the notes. On the link CAP or in the Kubernetes dev mailing list, where I've started a thread there, to talk about what could we do to improve the reliability of Kubernetes and to keep improving it. So I think we have people here from, I know we have people here from SIG release. I think we have people here from the enhancements team. I think we have people here from SIG testing. And of course, we have people here from an assortment of other technical SIGs. So this is open time. I'd be really interested to hear what people think about our state of reliability and what we could do about it. Go ahead and either raise your hand, or if you don't want to speak out loud, go ahead and type it into chat. And we'll start with Danielle, who says, we've had a lot of scary escape bugs in the kubelet over the last few releases that were all down to lack of coverage, sadly. Okay, Laura?
Hi. I've only been a CI signal shadow for this one release, so I don't have a lot of long-term observation of this, but I do feel that at least compared to the CI signal handbook, interpreting what is a flake or not, or expecting like the wall of green on the master blocking board as is written in the handbook, like it's not really like that right now. So there's a lot more like qualitative analysis that's going on. And obviously that's like a little risky or hard to like train people to do. So that's one observation from me as a newbie.
So what do you think would improve that? James asks, and this was a response for the kubelet bugs, scary escaped as in scary bugs that escape the release process, or scary bugs that are container escapes. By the way, Danielle and James, you're welcome to discuss this out loud if you want to.
I think Alana has something to say about this.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Yeah.
There we go.
Not necessarily
Yes,
on
Alana?
scary bugs, but just sort of as a general feedback. Right now, I'm one of, in SIG node, one of the sub-project leads for our CI signal team. And like we have our own team where what we're doing every week is we're triaging all sorts of test flakes or any issues with test signal. We're looking at all of our test grid dashboards, et cetera. We definitely, as Danielle said, have lacking coverage. I'm also quite concerned right now that, like, yeah, for example, in the previous release, we spent almost all of last year making this gargantuan effort to get the serial tests fully green for node passing. And then they immediately go and get broken again. It seems like there's not really any incentive right now for, like, we have these teams who are doing a lot of work to try to make sure that tests are passing. And a lot of that is behind the scenes. And one thing that Sergey, my co-lead, and I did is we wanted to give people a little bit more reward for this sort of thing. We wrote a blog post being like, hey, look at all these awesome people doing awesome work for like this node CI team. But fundamentally, that doesn't create an incentive for the people who are going and like breaking these things to not break them in the first place. We're catching a lot of stuff on post-submit rather than on pre-submit. Those people come in, you know, they make a contribution and then they're gone. Like they might be a part-time contributor or something like that. Or, you know, they've landed their particular feature and they add all these end-to-end tests. And then over time, the end-to-end tests aren't maintained and they start flaking or failing. And those people are now gone. And who does it fall on to make those tests start passing again? Oh, hey, Sergey. So I think that we, as a project, really need some kind of incentive such that like tests get fixed and it's not just falling on like special teams of people who end up being sort of the like people who are like, yeah, we want the tests to work, so we're going to fix them, because they end up fixing other people's like test failures. Like, I'm not sure how we can achieve this, but I think that there needs to be some sort of incentive because otherwise I think this is going to get swept behind the rug. We've got these really hardworking people doing a lot of stuff to try to make the tests work, to make the release pass, to fix these bugs. And that's not necessarily getting surfaced to the whole project or bringing in contributors where it needs to be.
Yeah, I mean, I actually just wanted to follow up on what Alana just said. Like, I've done release stuff and, you know, enhancements things. And so I get a broad view of like who's working on what. And it's a lot of the same people doing a lot of the work. And so, you know, when maybe you have a special team and the special team is filled with the same people who are doing a lot of the work in other SIGs, or, I mean, it seems like the fundamental issue is that there just like aren't enough active contributors in the project. And so it's like, you know, like reliability is really important, but, you know, some, like Alana's pointing out, like you get people who drive by and maybe they put something in and who's going to maintain it, is that there needs to be more maintainers. But I also don't necessarily know that that is like visible to all of the, you know, end users and, you know, companies that contribute, like how much help is needed. I think that, you know, it's like people think that it's just the classic like open source, like help is always welcome, but you guys seem to be doing pretty good. But when it's really like, no, we actually need more like dedicated help, because we need more people who have a more constant level of responsibility. And I think that in a way, like we're not as a project communicating that to like the sponsors and end users and yada, yada, yada. We're not communicating that like real, like, hey, like fever pitch, like we really need you to give people time to work on this kind of like a very clear message. So I guess I just don't want to see like the same people kind of run into the ground with even more responsibility, because I think that that's also like not really sustainable. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Kirsten. Sergey?
Eddie first.
Oh, Eddie first? Okay, sorry, was reading this wrong.
Yeah, what Kristen just said resonates with me so well, because the reality is that it's really hard to be a part-time contributor to Kubernetes, and there aren't a lot of new full-time contributors to Kubernetes being hired and just entering the community. And we need to make sure, I talked about this yesterday with Ben and Arno, but we need to find better on-ramps for people, because we've had plenty of people show up to different SIG meetings and they're like, hey, we're ready to contribute, and we just don't have anything for them to take on and work on, and you know, as a part-time thing that doesn't involve trust or a bunch of other domain knowledge. And so, yeah, that totally resonates with me a ton. We need to figure that out as a project. But what I actually wanted to say was that in terms of auditing all of our tests, we actually need, and we have planned to migrate all of our pipelines and proud jobs to our community-owned cluster as part of the initiative from SIG, Cadence Infra. And this may be coming sometime this year or next year, but that'll be a great time for everyone to actually like audit all of their tests and figure out what's old and needs to be updated or doesn't need to run. So.
Thank you. Okay, now Sergey.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I plus one to most of the things said before. I also want to bring up this reliability group document that was created about jailing SIGs. I don't really like jailing SIGs aspect of it, but the document listed a lot of improvements, how to track issues, how to raise visibility into failures, and how to simplify maintainers' life. Right now, it's kind of a pain managing like test grid, GitHub issues, tracking the progress, and there are some tooling for triage, like this triage tool that can be used, but overall, it's not like well integrated, and it's really hard to get visibility into that. So we're running this meeting, and we have people who understand all the aspects, like where to look, but there is no easy way to like newcomer to see like what's going on and how to troubleshoot what was read for a long time, that kind of things. So tooling definitely one of the things that will help project overall to get more reliable by exposing the issues and making them really clear.
Okay. Harris, did you want to say any of your remarks?
Sure. I do hear a lot of the pain points here about lack of reviewers and approvers. I hear all the time that people put in test flag PRs and then the reviewer bandwidth is just so low. And that's just quite unfortunate. And I think that this is something that we are working at the steering level. I'm also working on this at the governing board level. But I don't know what I don't know, and we don't know what we don't know. So if SIGs are not communicative about what they need as far as approvers and where, then we just can't be psychic. And we're also not going to do mentoring efforts for SIGs that don't have any onboarding program, onboarding programs, because it just doesn't make sense. You know, and having people come to SIG meetings and say, you know, stick around with us, take issues is no longer the onboarding program we think it is. And I think that we need to do something more drastic with our asks to end users and folks, because we just keep saying, oh, we need help, but no one actually says where, when, how. And I would love to work with folks on this. We have a humongous 17-page sustainability doc of our needs right now that we need to turn into asks. But only about 6 SIGs have weighed in on those 17 pages. So we definitely need more, I think, commitment from sub-project owners within the project to say what the deal is.
Okay. Great. Other comments, ideas, questions? Jordan?
Yeah, one thing I was thinking about, sort of around the pull request that Wojtek had opened, is whether or not we're considering health of an area when we're looking at introducing a new feature. So we've got a few different signals. We've got test flakiness, test coverage can be found out. I don't know if we're tracking that or publishing that automatically. And then as a trailing signal, we have, regressions that escaped into releases. And so something that I'm aware of for the components that I'm sort of reviewing proposals for is how healthy, stable those components are. And if someone's proposing a big change in an area that we know we're short on test coverage, I tend to consider that and say, before we go make a change here, we actually need to get the current state better tested to make sure we're not regressing anything. But I don't think we have any formal, that's not mentioned anywhere that I know of. And so I'd like to see people like maintainers considering that when they're looking at a new feature. Even if the feature proposal may be fine, but if they know, oh, we just had like 3 or 4 regressions in this area and we haven't actually gone back and closed those with better test coverage, we probably should do that as a prerequisite.
Yeah, it's going to be hard though, because often, obviously, the person showing up with a new feature may have no history with the project. And the regressions are related to something that happened a year ago. Not saying we won't have to do it. It's just going to be hard.
It is hard. I think sometimes we make the mistake of optimizing for contributors and forgetting about users. And we don't want to go 100% the other direction, say only users, forget about contributors, because that obviously hurts everybody in the end as well. But we have to have some feedback loop that is prioritizing what we actually ship to users. And so we have to consider that.
I mean, I actually think that's an interesting point that Jordan just made. And I'm thinking of it what do you need to get a feature into Kubernetes? You fill out a KEP, right? And maybe that's something, not a require. I'm not saying there needs to be a requirement that X reaches such a level before your feature goes in, but it could be valuable to have something that either has the author or the author has to collaborate with the SIG leads anyway for their KEP, maybe talk about what the test coverage is in, that area of the code, or maybe there's something there where it's not creating a rule, but it's adding information. And just by having to have some of those conversations, people can start thinking about it more, as opposed to this is a hard and fast rule, you can't merge this feature, whatever. But even just having at some point in that process, some kind of somebody has to actually think about it and not forget about it and say well, are there end-to-end tests in this area already? Because we say do you have test coverage, right? But is there existing end-to-end coverage? Is there whatever? I don't know. It seems like there's something there to explore, and how we can at least start thinking about highlighting things that are important to us in the KEP or in some other manner when we start thinking about features going into a release.
Yeah. Just checking if Danielle wants to talk on mic. Otherwise, I'll read out her comments.
Yeah, sure. So we regularly have, part of the issue here is new features in very old parts of the code base from people with no project history are, generally speaking, pretty scary. especially when we already don't have solid test coverage or necessarily even institutional knowledge of like how and why that code was written in the way it was. Especially now that like a lot of, say, Node, for example, like people don't work on Node anymore who did in the beginning, or have very little bandwidth to do reviews there. And a lot of new features tend to get like alpha landed before they have anything in the way of like competent E2E tests, with a promise that, you know, tests will come later, and then they don't happen. Or they don't happen to like a level that is good enough necessarily, and is hard to review when you're not also seeing what code changed. And so we kind of need to push that much earlier in the process.
I can maybe give an example of that, Danny. We recently, in the Node CI subproject, there was a feature that landed lock contention coverage for the kubelet. And some folks wanted to also add this to the kubelet configuration because I think it was only a command line flag. And we said, well, there's no test coverage for this. And it took like 6 months to get a working like test infra job. And like a lot of that was not because it actually took 6 months in order to get this working test infra job with the appropriate tests and then get the test green, but like reviewer bandwidth. It was not a high priority feature kind of thing. So that's a big example of that. I think new features in SIG Node, at least we've done a pretty good job of making sure like, no, like this has to have alpha tests. They have to actually run somewhere. They have to pass before we will merge this code. But we still have lots and lots of older code of which that's not true. And going back and trying to find all the places that that's the case and then fix it can be really challenging.
Yeah. Some comments from, unfortunately, this Chris a statement ago about enforcing a minimum threshold.
Yeah, I mean, there's got to be like some baseline set of tests. I feel like that we should just ask people for naturally. I'm sure we're already doing that.
Yes.
Maybe we're just not being strongly enough about like, hey, could you do this after the fact?
I think the problem to some extent is the way that we have chosen to test Kubernetes is very integration test focused. It's very difficult to unit test a lot of things. A lot of portions of the code base, the kubelet being a great example, have not a lot of unit test coverage. Some of the unit test coverage that does exist is like very difficult to expand or maintain. A lot of the code wasn't written to be unit tested. So a lot of the code ends up getting tested in the end-to-end tests, which are very expensive to run as well, right? Like you got to spin up a full cluster, you got to wait for a while, etc. And then we don't want people to take forever to wait for their PR to merge. So a lot of those tests are never going to get run in a pre-submit. We wait until a post-submit job runs, and then we see if that test passes or not. And so that can be a big problem because like, code can land and then it turns out the test never even passed. But the test wasn't running in the pre-submit, so nobody had any idea. So like that sort of thing is very common. I think it's great that we're talking about this at the community meeting because I'm not sure how many people have a lot of awareness about this sort of thing. Like I'd wager that the average contributor isn't sticking their nose inside test grid or poking around in there or seeing like, how is it that we actually like run our tests on like a periodic basis, on a pre-submit basis. It's, very complex. So I get that, but like, I think that we need some sort of better process for this because it's really hard to have a minimum threshold, at least like for me as a reviewer, like I want things to preferably be unit tested. If they can't be unit tested, then I want an end-to-end test. Like anything that is a new API has to have an end-to-end test that hopefully could be eventually promoted to perform a conformance test and so on and so forth. But we don't really have a project-wide policy for any of this stuff. We don't have code coverage as part of our linting. We don't have any requirements in terms of code coverage for code that lands, and so on and so forth.
So do you think that adding requirements in policy around testing and code coverage would make a difference?
It could. It depends what the requirements are.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of like, that's the fuzzy part for me, is the minimum threshold there.
Yeah, I think we need to figure out something for it, because what we have is unhealthy. I have spent way too much of my time over the last 6 months, like finding features that broke tests, but failures were ignored for a multitude of reasons.
Sometimes for years.
Oh yeah, I found tests that haven't passed in at least 5 years. Over the last like few months, like, but this isn't SIG venting, so.
So Paris asked a question in the chat. Could we have new feature folks provide contact details so we could reach out to them for maintenance and tell them that they will indeed get pinged in 12 months? I have definitely pinged authors of tests. The problem is if they don't work on Cube anymore, like there's no way to get them to come back and work on that thing. Or if they've moved on to a different area of Cube, or if they're working more on internal things at their full-time job, like that can be very challenging. There's also like just somebody earlier, I can't remember whom, mentioned like maintainer continuity, right? Like there was a lot of people who maybe worked on, for example, kubelet, sort of at the start of Kubernetes, and then like most of those people aren't active anymore in the project. They've got all this great knowledge that was like locked up in their heads, hasn't really been transferred to anybody. And so like, who knows what their plans were for test coverage? Like, we don't know. We can't go back. We can't go back in time and talk to these people. We can't bring them out from like, you know, wherever they might be now. I don't think that there's any reasonable way to do that consistently across the board. We might be able to do it in some cases. But just thinking like systemically, I don't think it's feasible. Things that could be feasible, like in terms of just like policy solutions. And this is not something that I've like thoroughly thought through, but just some possible options spitballing. Right now, we don't have any requirements for any new code coming into the code base to have test coverage. We could, I think, relatively straightforwardly, like our test suite has coverage capability. We could add a linter that says, if your PR causes test coverage to drop, it doesn't get merged. Like that's a pretty straightforward thing, right? Like if you've added new code, and like test coverage goes down, that means that you're not testing your new code. Don't do that. So that might be an option, but like I'm sure that there's other things. I would really like to see Kubernetes over time move away from like everything is integration tested and move more towards everything is unit tested. The unit tests can run faster than the integration tests. In theory, like the unit tests do take a while to run right now, but not as long as the full suite of integration tests. And the unit tests are all on pre-submit, whereas that is not true for a lot of these post-submit tests that people don't even realize they're submitting like a test that never works. And somebody goes back years later and it's like, oh, this stuff doesn't work. What do we do about that?
Okay, we've had we've had a lot of chatter on chat, and by the way, I will be saving the chat and publishing it with the meeting notes because there's been a lot of good comments on there. I just wanted to give, in our last 2 minutes here, give a brief chance for Madhav, Laura Santamaria, Danielle, and or Eddie, and Allison and Garima. And pardon me if I mispronounced that last one. If you have any further comments that you want to get on the audio.
Yeah, I can say something real quick. I think test grid and prow confuse and scare people away. And that just is the reality of it, right? It's a complex system that's hard to read for a new person. And I imagine most people that are adding stuff or fixing things and they get flakes, they don't even, you know, they have no idea what to look for in a flake. They just /retest and move on. I think we need to convince Jordan to maybe record some more sessions of debugging flakes. And yeah, I'm happy to help with that too. But I really think we need more resources for folks to just understand. And maybe the prow bot that tells you that your jobs failed, we can link to better resources, or hey, like track this down. And I don't know, there's a lot we can do there, but I've heard that that's a big point for people.
Okay, well, thanks. I do have one comment. As a lot of you know, before Kubernetes, I worked on the PostgreSQL project, which is 27 years old now, I believe. And let me say that the general problem we're talking about here is a problem that literally nobody has solved. I mean, particularly the problem of contributors come in, they contribute a feature, and then they change jobs and careers and vocations or die in a helicopter crash in one particularly noticeable incident. And then it's thrown on a fairly small group of maintainers to maintain their code in perpetuity thereafter. And that's not a problem I think that anybody in open source has yet solved. So the reason why it feels like a hard problem is it is a hard problem with a capital H. If people can continue this discussion, because I don't think we're going to solve this in one release or one cap or one specific measure. Again, any of the places you can discuss it on the existing cap, from WG reliability in contribex or testing or release chat, in the dev mailing list, or in future community meetings. Please do that, because I think we're going to need a lot of ideas and a lot of different steps and a lot of small improvements before things get better. And so with that, we are at the end of our time for the community meeting. And thank everybody for participating. Again, if you want to be MC for one of these things, or note taker, or usher, or please contact SIG contribex. In addition, if you have something that you believe needs to be discussed at a community meeting, please contact us and make sure that it gets on the agenda. And with that, I want to thank my usher, Laura, and my note taker, Allison, for this particular meeting, for helping out. And I'll see you all in the various Kubernetes forums. Thanks.